Hello. Looks like I'm having a bad hair night. Oh well. So yeah, I haven't made a video for a while because stuff's been going on, which I won't tell you about much because this is about the then, not the now of my life. Um, so I'm going to do a little uh flashback, I guess, back to Sausalito just before I went to Belize, and then I'll do more stuff on the southern Belize towns of Punta Gorda, the Garifuna towns of Punta Gorda and Livingston. And then, I'll also do a correction on a previous video, and I'll briefly mention Guatemala. But I'm going to talk about among other things, I'm going to talk about some of the music that I heard in Belize, and a lot of it is fairly sexually graphic, so trigger warning. I mean, if you haven't already got from the titles, there's going to be some mild obscenities, but I'm going to be talking about the music that I actually heard there. So, yeah, you've been warned. Okay. So, first of all, um, I in Sausalito, yes. I lived with um and hung out with an older woman. I'm not sure if I was living with her yet, but I was around her. She was in her 50s, so like not one of those women I talked about, the older women who were like in their 20s or whatever. She was actually by reason, Anyway, she was very kind to me. That's one thing I have to say. And she taught me how to make paper mache puppets. So I made one, and I made a rat. I made the face of a rat. I painted it. I made its front teeth yellow, and I made the part you put your hand in. I made it out of fur. And then she told me that I could speak. I could do a little puppet show in at the Sausalito Art Fair. There was another kid who had done it, and he wanted to say some racial slur that he thought was funny, and she taught him to say something that sounded similar but was not a racial slur. So she caught that one in time, but she didn't catch mine in time, even though I told her. I said, here's what I'm going to have my puppet say. I'm going to have him say, I was once a sewer rat. A sewer rat was I. The food was pretty shitty, but it kept me pretty high. Okay, I was 14, and that was my masterpiece, which I told her, but apparently she wasn't listening very well, because when I actually did that line in front of a live audience, she was not pleased. So when we actually got to the Sausalito Art Fair, I did that line, and she pulled me aside and she said, all this stuff about shit and dope is not going to cut it here. So that was the end of my career as a puppeteer. I tried later to make another paper mache puppet, but I had forgotten how. Okay, and a flashback. Back to Central America we go. So, first of all, a correction. I had said that the homes in the Mayan villages were made of not only the roofs and the walls were made out of coconut thatch, coconut leaves thatch. But they weren't. I don't think they were. I think that the only people who used that type of construction were the Garifunas in the town of Livingston, Guatemala. What the Mayans used, I recall, it was either wood with thatched with a thatched roof, or in Guatemala, adobe with a thatched roof. Um, yeah, or maybe not even a thatched roof, because up in the mountains it wasn't so tropical. There weren't so many palm trees. Um, there were some earthquakes in Guatemala. There was an earthquake, a big earthquake in Guatemala shortly before I got there. And a lot of Mayans who lived in these thatched, adobe meaning bricks that are made out of straw and mud, mostly mud, and they make little frames for them. They make bricks and they make houses out of them using also mud as the equivalent of cement or mortar. So then a lot of these adobe homes fell down, and people were badly hurt. A lot of people hurt or killed. I don't know if the earthquake hit Livingston or not, but if it had, they would have been much better off in their homes made out of thatched bamboo and out of thatch roof and walls with a frame constructed out of the local bamboo, which was really thin. If that's and then newspapers used glued to the walls to fill in the gaps. If that had fallen on them, they would have been in much better shape. It was much lighter material, and it would have been easier to rebuild them and so forth. But in Livingston, they made everything in that style, the homes, and then later I saw like bars, what looked like clubs on the beach, made out of that same style when I went back in the 90s. They filled in the gaps with by pasting newspapers on the wall, but to glue the newspapers to the wall, they used little globs of wet flour. Yeah, they made paste out of wet flour. Unfortunately, flour happens to be also a food, so it draws vermin. In Livingston, that was cockroaches, which I'll talk about later. In the town of Asian Indian descent people in Rancho, they also did that, and it attracted rats. So there were flaws in that system, but it was super cheap. All you had to do, almost all of the material was natural, and all you had to get were newspapers, which you could probably find from the trash or whatever, and then buy a little flour, and you could make a house, an outhouse, a regular house, whatever. So that's what they did, and I don't think the Mayans ever did that I recall. Okay, that's my correction. And so now we are going to go back to Belize, to Punta Gorda. Well, we're not just, okay, hold on. We're not going to quite do that yet. I'm going to do a whole overview of my year in Central America in terms of, which was 10 months in Belize, 2 in Guatemala. I'm going to list foods that I ate. Not everything, but some that I think may be of interest, or just for whatever reason. Okay, so I ate sea turtles. Yeah, I know that wasn't good, but I didn't know they were endangered, and a lot of the people around me were eating them, especially in Guatemala, in Livingston, and with rice. It was delicious. It tasted like beef, but even richer. Okay, I ate river turtles, iguana, armadillo, the Garifuna in Punta Gorda like to eat pigtail. And in Guatemala, one of them served me a pig foot. It had been roasted in a fire, but it still had some of its hair on it. It really needed a shave, but I ate it anyway. Um, and yes, the Asian Indian people, descended people who were called and who called themselves coolies, not an insult in Belize, is an insult in other places. Um, they served up pig snout and pig ear. Now, pig tail was fine, a little fatty, not too bad, meat on it. Pig tails and pig ears were this gelatinous, chewy. Didn't love them. Um, People ate cassavas. Garifuna made cassava bread, which I tried to pretend I liked, but didn't. Some of this I mentioned in past videos, but not quite this way. Uh, White rice and black beans. So rice and beans were considered sort of the Belizean national dish. They are actually considered the national dish of Cuba. Um, they're real cheap to make, and they don't taste bad. Uh, in Guatemala, I ate corn tortillas and black beans. In Belize, tortillas, what they called tortillas, were really quite different. They were a big round thing of basically a thick round piece of white bread, fairly bland. Okay, so I had tea with condensed milk. They picked up from the British. Sometimes I ate, and people ate, frozen condensed milk as if it was ice cream. There was something in Belize called ideals, which were there in the 60s, 70s, kind of iconic. They were these little plastic bags of like Kool-Aid, frozen in different colors. And somebody described them as they were all tasted the same regardless of color, and they tasted like sugar with a hint of chemicals. Okay, that may be true from an outsider's point of view, but if you're young and you're living there for a while and it's hot and you get these these ideals, they were delicious because it was hot outside and they were frozen. They were delicious. They were really ideal to me as a child and again as a teenager. So I ate canned corned beef from mainland China, which had only Mao had just died. It was only starting to transition to a sort of mixed economy with capitalism in it. So I don't know how these canned corned beef containers made it from China to Belize, but somehow they did. Okay, I mentioned before I had British K rations, which are canned food that they give their members of the military to eat. And this was tasted much more like the can than the eggs. It was scrambled eggs, but it tasted more like the can. It was disgusting. Yeah, really pretty disgusting. Okay, again in Rancho with the so-called coolies, I had some cow stomach. The Garifunas were big on fish. They were definitely a seagoing people. Certainly did not conform to the United States idea that Black people don't swim much. In fact, they were the ones that got me hooked on outdoor swimming. I'd done it before, but I never really loved it until I went to Punta Gorda, and a Garifuna teen taught me to swim way, way out. Okay, they ate fried fish, and they ate fish boiled in coconut milk. And regardless of how they cooked it, they always ate the meat on the head, which was actually quite good. Um, okay. There were also these, apparently, this is a British Caribbean staple. Um, they're called Johnny cakes, and they were basically just flour biscuits, white flour biscuits. Okay, the tropical fruits. Now, this may be a mix of standard English names, Belizean names, and Hawaiian names, because these are the names I remember. Okay, I had mangoes, lots of those, definitely good. Fresh mangoes, a lot of them in Hawaii, a lot of them in Belize. Sour sop, known by other names. I know it's this like green, sort of spiky fruit. You don't eat the outside, you eat the inside, which is white with black seeds. You don't eat the seeds, but it's delicious. A ripe sour sop is delicious. Okay, we had guavas, oranges, something called Molly apples, which were not apples. They were red with white meat and a black pit in the middle. Starry apples, which also weren't apples. They were kind of star shaped, yellow, and had little black seeds in them. Papayas, um, coconuts, as of course, we had coconuts and coconut water and coconut milk. And then talk about not so wonderful canned food in Punta Gorda. We got something from the United States called canned. It was canned, and it was called imitation Vienna sausage ends and pieces. Somebody said, I told somebody in the US that what it was called, and she said, geez, every part of that sounds gross and disgusting. And then you put them all together, it sounds even worse. It wasn't great tasting. Okay, alcohol. I had rum and Coke, rum and 7 Up, uh, rum and beer. They mixed rum with the local beer and called it baby champagne. Of course, I had the local beer. I think the most famous one was called Charger beer. That was the most common. I had instant coffee in Guatemala after sleeping in a coffee grove. Um, in the town of Placencia, I had quite cheaply, for like 25 cents a pound, I had cooked lobster tails, which I ate with lime juice. So not everything I ate there was bad. Some of it was luxuriously good at cheap prices. The salts were there weren't very many. I mean, okay, there were not very many spices yet. Besides lime juice, there was salt and pepper. And among the coolies of Asian Indian descent, they did still put rice. They put curry on their rice, which turned it yellow and gave it more flavor. This, along with the fact that somebody said that other than coolies, they were called Hindus, which she just thought of as an ethnic group, not actually a religion. They had no idea it was a religion. Anyway, those were the only two things among the Asian Indian descended people that I encountered that actually seemed like they had any memories from India at all. Otherwise, they seem to have completely lost that culture. Okay, when I went back in the 1980s, they had discovered ice cream. Sour sop ice cream was exquisite. And the food had more spices. There were more tourists, a lot more. And so I guess they had learned to spice up their food to appeal to the foreign taste. Okay, radio. No TV yet. I talked about this a little. There were basically two main radio stations in Punta Gorda that you could hear. One was Radio Belize, which had a mix of some of the less obscene Caribbean music, some American music, local news, BBC News, pretty good. And then we got Radio Amatique from Guatemala. The phrases we most heard, okay, the most heard phrase on Radio Belize was, this is the voice of Radio Belize, the new Central American nation of Belize in the heart of the Caribbean basin. Harmless, right? The stuff we heard from Guatemala was a little more sinister, actually. One thing we heard a lot was Belize es Guatemala, which meant that Belize was Guatemala. That's what they believed. Of course, it wasn't. And there was a simmering, border dispute, kind of Cold War going on between the two nations. And in the Garifuna town of Barranco, you could also pick up Cuban radio. And in the Garifuna town of Livingston, you could also pick up United States radio. I may have said already in previous videos some of this, sorry, but you may have already forgotten by now. Okay, songs. So here's where really the trigger warning comes in, that these songs from mainly Jamaica and Trinidad, I think, were fairly filthy. In the USA, they had like euphemistic sexual sorry, in Belize, yeah, in the 1960s, apparently, I don't remember this, but my father talked about it. In the 1960s, they had this song that played all the time. It was sexual, but it used euphemisms. It was about a doctor whose needle was too big, and in addition to that, he inserted it in the wrong hole, which caused it to be painful. Okay, double entendres, right? By the 70s, they seem to have abandoned double entendre entirely in their music and just flat out said sexual stuff. And some of this, I'm going to read just the title. Some of them maybe a line or two. Some of them a verse or two. I'm not a singer, so I'll just read them out. Sometimes I'll use slight euphemisms, like using the word fork to refer to intercourse, and the word stick as the word for male genitals instead of the one that they actually use. Never mind, despite all that, this would demonetize me, I think, had it ever been monetized in the first place. Okay, here we go. The most common, white rum and pum pum. If you can't figure out what pum pum means, this song is about alcohol and sex. I think you can take it from there. But if you can't, here we go. The first the lines. Have you ever been in bed with white rum in your head and a pum pum big and red? Well, I have. Okay, you get it. A song, not sexual, but adult themed. I would like you and my sweetheart to be friends. A man trying to convince his wife to be friends with his, girlfriend on the side. Okay, this one. Tell me, who can I talk to? My breath is so bad. I think I'm going mad. I'm just a backseat sucker. First verse was about intercourse. Second verse about cunnilingus, apparently both taking place in the back seat of a motor vehicle. Okay, there was an old song called "Once There Was a Very Old Man Who Tried to make a hole in a dam." Sorry, I blew that one. The original song, "Once there was a very old ram who tried to make a hole in a dam." Okay. The song I'm going to reference now and quote a bit because it's kind of funny, although it's not funny for old men really in that situation. Yeah. Anywho, it's to the tune of the Ram song, and it goes like this. Once there was a very old man who thought he had a wonderful plan. He paid a chick to suck his stick, but it just would not stand because he had low blood pressure with a stick that you just can't measure. His stick was so very long that it just would not stand. So when he's feeling blue, just can't get a screw, he remembers his hand, and whoops, there goes another baby boy. Whoops, there goes another baby girl. Those two babies were just bounced out of this world. And they did not use the word stick. They used a word that rhymes with it. Okay. So that was a lot of the sort of music that was played. And of course, there was other kinds of music, and there was American music, and blah, blah, blah. Okay. I walked around town with the two young females, Margarita, 14, which was also my age, and Vanessa, age 21. And they found it amusing to say to the men that they passed, I want to juk juk. I want to fucky fucky. But they didn't really want to. And of course, the men would get mad and they'd say, well, then come here then. And they didn't. And Margarita actually did something similar to me, indicating that she wanted to have sex with me. And then getting annoyed when I felt like she should because she had said that she would. Yeah, and eventually I did. And of course, it was a letdown after all that buildup, but never mind. You know, in that culture, general culture, Belizean culture, they didn't really have the idea that you should do what you say you're going to do, or that you should say the truth about anything. I mentioned that when I was a child, a woman gave me something, candy, and I said, "Is this sweet?" And she said, "Yes." And I ate it, and it was a mint. And I said, "This isn't sweet." And she just laughed. When I was 15 and in Belize City, a woman came up to me and said she wanted the equivalent of 25 cents to get a bowl of soup. And then, so I gave it to her. And then she kind of beckoned me to come with her. And she went into a drugstore and bought a condom with the money I had just given her for soup. it's funny because she just said this lie and then immediately showed me that it had been a lie without saying a thing about it, and apparently thought nothing of it. I deduced that she was probably a prostitute and did not continue to keep company with her. Um, okay, here's a little side note about the phrase juk juk, which of course refers to intercourse. Any word that like is short and repetitive in twos like that, juk juk, or fucky fucky fucky, refers to intercourse, and kind of I guess juk juk is kind of an onomatopoeia. It makes kind of a similar noise to what the activity they're referring to makes. And apparently the word juk also referred to intercourse in the American South among Black people. Um, and so there were these places called juk juk. That, no, they were just called juk houses. They were really brothels, maybe small brothels, whatever. But a lot of blues singers made a lot of their money by playing in those places. And supposedly, according to what the musician Gil Scott Heron, what I heard him say when I saw him was that the word jazz started in New Orleans brothels, and the word jazz sounds similar to the word jizz, so there's a connection there. But back to the word juk. So juk houses were where these musicians played, but then I guess they lost a big source of income because these machines were invented, and you could just put a coin in and they would play music, so they didn't need live entertainment. And these machines started in juk houses, and so they were called jukeboxes, and that is where we get our word jukebox from. You know, those things you put in whatever amount of money and then they play music. That's a jukebox, and that's where the name comes from. Okay, so these young women also sat around saying Jamaican words based on the word clot. Apparently in Jamaica, there's these insults. There's a variety of insults varying in severity, referencing blood clots, and they're taken very seriously there. But these young women had just heard them and repeated them for fun. Blood clot, Ross clot, which means ass clot, Bumba clot, which I think refers to the vagina, and then pussy clot, which is apparently fighting words. Okay, so this just gives you a little feel of the place. There was a little old lady, and the teenagers, it was a small town, and the teenage boys kind of used to antagonize her because she had either not used or forgotten something that I learned as a freshman in high school, which is the more you react to an insult, especially verbally, the more insults you are going to get. So you should learn not to react. Unfortunately, she obviously had dementia, so it really isn't that funny, but it certainly seemed so at the time. So what these boys would do, they would go like this, which is an obscene gesture, basically means fork you. And this woman, in her high-pitched voice, would reply with this string of insults, um, the same string of insults every time. And I mean, it really was objectively funny, even though it was in retrospect sad. So she would say, "You monkey dog, you pick the lice and eat it. I seen you pick it and eat it. You play with your mommy." But in this very high-pitched voice. Okay, so much for local entertainment. You know, there was no TV, there were no movies there at that time. So kids did things to amuse themselves. But one day she said, "Me no mess with people, you know? Me no mess with people when I go out." So she didn't bother people. She didn't harass, she didn't hassle people when she went out, and really did not get why they kept bothering her, and what a spectacle she was making that encouraged it. Anyway, okay, let me talk about one of the little trips I took to Barranco, another Garifuna village. You could only reach by boat, and as I mentioned, there were 4 foreigners living there. Three of them were Americans who had met in the Peace Corps, and one was a woman from El Salvador who was married to one of the men. Actually, there were 6 people at the time because they both had 2 little girl toddlers who were adorable, and they would walk around when gnats were biting everybody else and not get bitten, or at least didn't act like they were getting bitten. Okay, so one weekend or so, I went there, and I was staying with these foreigners. I paid a little, but they were sometimes, but they were also nice to me. And so they had made some kind of a deal with a local Garifuna man whereby they would go fishing on their sailboat. Okay, the foreigners owned the sailboat. The local Garifuna just owned these like canoes called dories. And apparently, at least in Barranco, they thought that the sailboats were better for fishing. So they made a deal with this Garifuna man that he could ride with them and fish with them on the boat. And then at the end, he would give them half the fish he caught. I think they already knew that he would catch more. He caught way more. So the other white guy caught 2 fish. I caught 1 fish. And the Garifuna guy just kept catching fish, one after the other. I have no idea how he did it or what he was doing differently. But as I said, the Garifuna were definitely an ocean, a sea going people, and stuff involving boats and getting food off the ocean. And swimming in the ocean, they just knew how to do it better. And then when I came back, when you're on a sailboat, you get the sun and then the reflection of the sun. I was very dark, so dark that one quite dark young Garifuna man said, "Where have you been? Punta Negro?" Which was a real town, but also Negro is Spanish for black. I looked really black. I mean, maybe not literally black, but I was quite dark because my skin got dark easily when it was exposed to the sun. It really changed color a lot. And Vanessa held her arm close to mine, and she was also fairly dark. She was like, "Your skin isn't that much lighter than mine now," and it kind of seemed to be true. Um, okay, so since we're talking about Garifuna obscenities, I may have already mentioned this. But anyway, the Garifuna had a obscenity that they actually said pretty often, uh, called which went Hobe Nederabu, which just meant eat my ass. Um, I made the mistake in Livingston of saying it to a Spanish man, thinking he wouldn't understand it. But he lived there, so he had learned it. If I had learned it, why wouldn't he have learned it? He lived around among Garifuna, and he didn't take it as a joke, and he called me something that sounds similar to corksucker. So he didn't think it was funny at all. If they wanted to pep that insult even further, they would say, Hobe Nedrobu con salo. Yes. It may have been the same weekend where I went fishing in Barranco, and then they were scaling the fish. Obviously, they knew how. I didn't. And a different Garifuna man said, "You're a nederabu." No, he started calling me Cephigual, which I did not know what it meant because I couldn't scale fish. Now, in different cultures, there are different things that they just assume that adults and even teenagers will just know how to do by that age. For example, among the Navajo, they would just assume that you knew how to make a fire and basically that you knew how to herd sheep. They wouldn't explain how to do it. The Garifuna expected that you could catch fish. Most folks in Belize thought that by that age you should know how to do laundry using a wash bucket and a scrub board and a big blue cake of laundry soap. And in Livingston, they thought you were backwards at age 14, 15 if you did not know how to do that same thing, even without a scrub board, just by like rubbing the clothing against each other. Obviously, I knew none of those things. Didn't know how to do them. Anyway, so the guy called me Cephigual, and then he said, Cephigual, hey, Cephigual is a nederabu. Well, I knew what that meant already, so I knew that Cephigual must be some sort of insult. And then after he left, this boy, somewhere in the 9 to 12 range, I think, he seemed genuinely offended on my behalf. And he told me that Cephigual means basically crazy, crazy and half stupid. So yeah, he had been dissing me, and this boy really seemed to be a bit upset about that, which is actually kind of touching. Yeah, and so yes, one of the other things I learned during my short time going to school in Punta Gorda was that among the Quechua Mayans, there is a phrase. I think it's Kushimak Shalak. And apparently this is not taken so lightly. I said it to a Quechua Mayan teenager who spoke English as well as the Quechua dialect of Mayan. He just looked at me and said, "Have some respect." Okay. And okay, in Belize, I think there is this strange cultural thing where the middle-aged women are actually quite polite, whereas the younger women and teenagers just say whatever's on their mind, you know. So like when I went there at about 14, 15, one of the girls looked at me and said, "He looked good, gal." But when I went up back at the advanced age of 30, one of the towns, which did have a culture of being even a bit more like rough, verbally insulting. Anyway, a teenage girl there looked at me and said, "He favor donkey," which means he looks like a donkey. So they basically said what they wanted to say. Whereas the middle-aged women, at least when I went back in the 90s, they were actually quite polite. I was closer to their age. Maybe that made a difference. And also, I was clearly, well, they thought I was a recent arriver, which I was, but they didn't know I'd lived there before, of course. So I went to this restaurant in Punta Gorda. This was in the 90s. Went to this restaurant in Punta Gorda, run by Garifuna. And one of the women said to the other one, "Hobe nederabu," which they said fairly casually to each other. And I kind of chuckled, and she said, "So you do understand?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Sorry." I was like, "Forget about it. I'm not offended. I think it's amusing." Okay, so I think I put the obscenities of three languages in the title. There were both Garifuna, a fairly small number of them, mostly just in Livingston, but I'm sure in other places as well. And there were Quechua Mayans in Guatemala. In Belize, there were two Mayan ethnic groups. The dominant majority one was the Belmo. Sorry. I'm drawing a blank. It starts with a B. I think anyway, the Quechua were the minority ethnic group. In Guatemala, there were quite a lot of Quechua. Yeah, I've read about them. They spell it, with a Q, whereas in Belize, when I read about them, it seemed to be with a K. But it's the same word, the same Mayan sub tribe. Ah, yes, the majority sub tribe of Mayans in Belize was the Mopan. And so anyway, these obscenities must have existed in Guatemala as well as in Belize. And so that's why I said the obscenities of three nations. Anyway, I think that'll do for tonight. And so I'm going to end this. Good night, or as the Garifuna would say, to each other mostly, Buiti Guyo.